Today we're going to continue our work with variables and data types, and we're going to be using a calculation that contains multiple variables that we got from multiple text boxes from the user. I'm creating a project called Salary Calculator. And this form is going to contain two text boxes, four labels, if you're wondering what I'm doing here, after I've selected a label, I do Control C, that does a copy, that's a keyboard shortcut, and then I do Control V, and that's a keyboard shortcut for paste. So once you drag that first control onto your form, you can duplicate it, and that can speed things up a bit. Now I need 3 buttons. So I'm going to drag my first one on there, and then I'll do Control C to copy the button, Control V, and Control V. Now the only thing about this is you'd think that it would paste right where your cursor is, but it will paste it to the middle of the form. I'm going to delete this one. Okay. I'm going to drag a box, holding down my left mouse key, and drag a box over all of my controls, and I'm going to bump the font size up a bit so that I can see what's going on. Up to 14, hit enter. Move these, I'm selecting them as a group again, and just mousing over one of them, you'll see that the cursor turns into those crosshairs, and that means a move, because you can see there's an arrow at the end of each one. So I'm going to move all those up, click off, select all 3 of my buttons, and now if I drag over the handle of one of them, they will all resize. They're a little too close together now, so if I go out into this layout control bar up top, there is a button that will make it equal spacing. And so here it is. Increase horizontal spacing. So clicking that will spread them all out a little bit. Okay. Now to set what the display will look like. I'm going to select this label first. I'm going to change the text on this one to hourly wage. I'm not going to name this one. I'm going to leave it as its default label 1, because this is not going to be a dynamic label, so we don't have to access it programmatically. I'm going to leave that label 1 as its name to kind of remind myself that I won't need to access this via code. Next one, change the text property to hours per week. I'm going to leave them where they are right now. I know it doesn't look pretty, but we're going to take care of that. And then lastly, this one is going to be salary. Oops. There we go. Okay. Let's name the text boxes now on this column. The first one, I'm going to have this match up with what this is. So this one is going to be TXT hours for the name. Oops, my mistake. TXT wage, because this is going to be the wage that the user enters in. This one is going to be TXT hours. And I want to stress this, I know I've said it before, but when possible, you want to match the text box name with whatever the label is saying. It's going to make sense in that this is the label that's displaying what goes in the text box, so the text box should have a similar name. And then later, when we pull that value into a variable, we're going to name the variable accordingly as well. And then lastly, the label at the bottom, I'm going to call this one LBL salary, because this one we will be updating. And set my placeholder text LBL salary with the angle brackets around it. Okay, we have everything named with the exception of the buttons, but maybe we can try cleaning it up now. I'm going to select these 3 static labels, and up here on my layout bar I want to pick the button that says Align Rights. I want to right align all of them. And generally when you have a form like this, you're going to right align your labels because you want the right edge to line up on the form text boxes, and those ones will be left aligned. Okay, I have them all selected still. I'm going to move them all over. And now I'm going to pick everything kind of on the right hand side. I can drag a box over these and select all of them, or I can hold down my shift key and that will select all of it. Going up into my layout bar again, I'm going to click Align Lefts, and that lines everything up, and now we kind of have this nice space down the middle, and everything's lined up here and everything's lined up here. And if you want, you can move everything over a little bit. You don't have to use your mouse. If you have something selected, you can use your arrow key. Now I want to select this one, and it's kind of its paired up text box, and now I can go here and I can say Align Middles, and those two were already kind of lined up. I'm going to go on to the next one, Align Middles, and same with this one here, Align Middles. And now I can see they're kind of a little off, so I'm going to bump this one up a little bit. So we get a nice looking form right now. I'm going to make these a little bigger. And because we're expecting numeric data in here, so this isn't going to be like a first name, last name field. We see it's an hourly wage, hours per week. Because it's numeric data, I should have these be right aligned. And that's something that we do in forms, is we right align numeric data. So we go after the text align property, and I pick right, and same with this one. Go after this text box, text align, it was left, I'm going to change that to right. So this part is ready to go. On to our buttons. I'm going to change the names first, and then I will change the text first, and then go back and update the names accordingly. This one is going to be Submit, Clear, and Exit. Going back, BTN Submit, BTN Clear, and BTN Exit. So now we have our buttons ready to go. I want to set my accept and cancel button properties on the form right away, because I want to do myself a favor and kind of slow down my debugging time. Looking for the accept button property on the form. Pick the drop down, button Submit, and then for the cancel button, I'm going to pick button Exit. Now we haven't written any code for those yet, so let's take care of that right away too. Double click on my exit button, application.exit. Don't forget to do your opening and closing parentheses. Oops. And then for button Submit, well, we don't know what we're doing there yet, but that's all right. Okay, let's run it the first time. And looking good, except this here, we keep forgetting to clear that out. We see that our text box has focus on the correct one. We always want the focus to be on the first text box on the form, so that's great. We should probably test out our tab order. So that tabs down to the next text box. Great. Submit, Clear, Exit. So we're looking pretty good. If we weren't happy with the tab order, what we can do is we can go to View and then Tab Order, and you'll see there's a little number right next to all of the controls, and what you do is you go through and you click them in the order that you want the tabs to appear. Once you're happy with it, go to View, and then Tab Order again will escape you out. So I want this to load on form. I want that to clear out. So double click anywhere empty on your form, and I'm going to say LBL salary dot text. Let me make this a little bigger here. Equals quotes, quotes, semicolon. Testing it again. Start. Excellent. Now, there's one more thing that we can do that will help speed up our development time. And the thing is, with these sort of programs where we're testing out numbers, we want to give it consistent data every time that we test. And what am I talking about? Well, when you go through here, you're going to be typing in numbers, tabbing through. Maybe you'll be accidentally hitting the keyboard. And even if you do get numbers correct, in that they're only numbers and not letters, you're still probably going to do something different every time. And when you're testing out a calculation, you want to be consistent. And if you do be consistent, then you still have to be careful and type it out. And that can be a little tedious because you have to click through each of these. So what we are going to do is give it some default data. So for hourly wage, let's have it be $8. And then hours per week, let's try 40. And this will drastically reduce our development cycle, our debugging cycle. Every time we run it and we want to see if it works, this is going to speed that up so we can spend more time concentrating on our code. So now if we hit start, we see we have those numbers in there. So that's great. Okay. It's not done yet, though. We have to actually do some more things. Now, we didn't write clear, and we don't have submit going back to the focus. That's okay. We've done enough of our busy work to get the program ready. Now it's time to actually start writing some code. So, double-clicking on submit. I'm going to get rid of this because we know what we need to do. Before we do anything else, we are going to write our application formula, our pseudocode. And every program that we're going to do is always going to follow these steps. The first step is declare variables. Then get input from the user. Do the calculation. And lastly, output the results to the user. If you recall, we call this pseudocode. Not quite normal English language, but also not really quite code either. So this is a good recipe for us to be able to write our program. And what we do then is that underneath each line, we just enter down and we work on our code right there. And then what we have when we're done is a nice commented program already. But let's look at our form. So we haven't really talked about what it's going to do. I think it's probably fairly obvious that it's going to calculate our salary, but how do we do that? Well, if you get paid $8 an hour and you work 40 hours a week, then your paycheck would be $320. Let's check my math here. So pull out my calculator. 8 times 40, and we have $320 per week. If we want to consider salary, though, salary is usually based on your year. So there are 52 weeks in the year. So we take that times 52. And then that's what we're looking at for a salary. So what we want to do is we want to take what we just did in our calculator, and we want to do that in code. Now, the code that we did last week was taking a number and doubling it. So we took whatever we got from our input and we multiplied it times 2. This is a little more complex, but the principle of it is still the same and the approach is still going to be the same. So going back into our button click, I'm going to double click submit, and we're going to start with our variables. Now, the variables that we need, that we want, are here. They're whole numbers, right? And when we think about whole numbers, the data type that we're talking about is an integer. So an integer is 1, 2, 3, up to a million, and it can also be -1, -2, -3. So they're whole numbers. And we need to think about, well, what kind of input are we going to allow our user to enter? And we have to think about, well, how is it measured in real life? Well, I think rarely will you ever make an actual exact dollar amount per hour. Usually it's like $8.25, $8.75, $8.60. Maybe the hours per week is a little more reasonable, but maybe you work 42 hours a week or 42.5. So we're going to want to allow our user to be able to do stuff like that. So that means if we want to allow a decimal point, then the data type that we want is going to be a double. So we're going to declare doubles for our variables. Now, looking again at our form, we're going to want a variable to hold the wage amount. We're going to want a variable to hold the hours per week. And then lastly, we're going to want a variable to contain the total, which in this case is going to be the salary. It's going to contain the result of our calculation. So the first one we say is double, and I say DBL wage. Remember we had a TXT wage? And we're going to set the initial value to 0. If we don't, we're going to get an error when we try and use that variable. Next, double DBL hours equals 0. And again, the DBL is a naming convention. Because it's of a double naming type, we use that just like we use TXT for a text box. Now, if you're wondering why we're getting this squiggly error, you might be getting a green or a yellow one. This is because I have not used it. I'm assigning it a value, but I'm never using it. It's not an error. It's not going to keep my program from building. But it's a reminder to say, maybe you don't need this. But we know that we do. We just haven't gotten to using it yet. Lastly, double DBL salary equals 0. Okay, we finished the declare variables part. Next, getting the input from the user. So we know that one of our variables has to be on the left-hand side of the equal sign. If it's on the left-hand side, it's going to receive the value from whatever's on the right. And so we did TXT wage for our text box where the user will be entering this in. So TXT wage. TXT wage by itself is just a text box. So if you put this there, that's not going to work. .NET isn't smart enough to know that you want to use the text property on there. Remember, there are a lot of different properties on there, and it can't guess. It's definitely the most commonly used one, but we still have to tell it specifically what we want. So get rid of my semicolon and say txt wage dot text, and end that out. I can click off, and it's still not happy. And if we recall, it gives us an error message that says cannot implicitly convert type string to double. Well, the .text property is a string. That's what the user types in. But on our left-hand side of our equation, we have a double type. So we have to do what's called a conversion. It's not smart enough to know that we want to take whatever the user typed and put it into our double variable. So we have to tell it. So I'm going to take this whole thing here, and I'm going to pass it to one of my conversion functions. And those are easy to remember because they start with convert. And because it's part of this library, I say convert dot, and then to, because I want to convert it to a double. That's part of it, convert dot to double. The next is we have to pass that value to the function, which means we need an open parentheses, and then at the end I need a close parentheses. And this is the act of us passing this whole business here, which is a string, to our conversion function. And in this case, then, it spits it out on this side of it when it's done. And you can think of these as a factory. You can think of it as somebody eating something and spitting it back out, whatever helps. The factory is probably the more common metaphor for it. But all we know is that when we pass it this value, If it's a valid piece of text representing a number, it's going to convert it to a number and put it in that variable for us. Next line, dBL hours. It's on the left-hand side of our equation. It's going to receive the value. And because we already know what we kind of did the line before, we can use that as an example. So I'm going to say convert.toDouble, open parentheses, and this time we want the value they typed in the hours text box. So txt hours.text, close parentheses, semicolon. So with both of these here, we know that this contains the text value, the converted text value from the text wage box. This one's going to contain the converted value from the hours text box. Looking at my list here, I have one more variable I need. This one doesn't come from a text box. This one's going to be the salary. And we talked about how do we compute the salary is hours times wage, which is how much money you make per week, times 52 weeks in a year. We measure salary per year. Now, in the previous example, we took our number and we multiplied it times 2. So we had something that would look like this. If I wanted to say, for example, double my wage, I would say dBL wage times 2. And so we know that we're taking this value and multiplying it times 2. But that's not what we want to do here. But what we can do is you're able to use more than just one variable per calculation. You don't have to use a number. We would say this is hard-coded here. Instead, what do we want to do? Well, let's put a comment here so that we kind of know what we're doing. So we would use our pseudocode language and we would say salary equals wage times hours per week. I'm using X. You know you can't use X, you got to use an asterisk, but that's okay. It's pseudocode. Hours per week times 52 weeks per year. And that kind of gives us a nice explanation of what the formula is. And then when we're down on the next line, we can kind of follow that as an example. So I already have wage right here. Well, I need hours per week. Okay, dBL hours. Oops. dBL hours, and then it wants times 52 weeks per year. So that one we can just hard code our number in. That's not going to change anytime soon. 52. And actually, this is all supposed to be down on the next line, right? Because we're actually doing the calculation now. So I'm going to move that. There we go. Okay, we did the calculation. Wage times hour times 52. And lastly, all we have to do is output it back out to the user. So I'm going to say LBL salary, because that's the label that we wanted, dot text equals, now this works just like our variables do, right? But because this is on the left hand side, it's going to receive whatever we tell it to do. And in this case, then it's going to take it and it's going to display it out to the user. So our dBL salary is what contains our value. Semicolon, and it's not happy. So we mouse over it and it says cannot implicitly convert type double to string. But that's okay, we know how to do this one. So we say dot toString, open parentheses, close parentheses. So there's our application. Declare your variables, get the input from the user, do your calculation, and output it to the user. So let's try it. Hit start. Wow, that's nice. We already have our values in there, so I say submit, and there we go. And if I still bring up my formula that I tested out in the calculator, I can see those numbers match up exactly. And whenever you're doing math like this, it's always a good idea to test it manually with the calculator in case something's wrong with your formula. You want to match up the same values that your application is doing. Okay, So what else do we have to do? Well, we didn't do our clear button. So let's do that one. We want to clear out all the text values and the labels that we have. So we say txt hours, and instead of saying text, recall that we can do this now. We can get rid of .text and we can say .clear. Because it's a method, because it's doing some action stuff, we have to do an open and close parentheses on them. Next up, txt wage.clear. Lastly, LBL salary. Now, labels don't have the clear methods, so we still have to do text equals open quotes, close quotes, semicolon. Hitting start, submit, great, that works, and clear. There's a problem though, and that is that when we do a clear, we need to return focus back up to this first text box. Minor details, but they're important. So that is the hours. So we say focus, open, close parentheses. Let's try again. Submit, clear. There we go. Excellent. Test it with another value, 40. Hit submit. The same thing with submit. We want that focus to return back up to that first text box, and we want it to highlight it so that it's ready to go. So that needs to go after the rest of our code for button submit, and we will say txt wage dot focus, open close parentheses, txt wage dot select all. Hitting start again. Submit. Excellent. Change this one maybe to 45. I can see it's more, and it goes back up to where it's supposed to go. So that's really it. Always what we want to do is we want to give our application another once over to make sure everything is finely polished. And it's really important to put these tiny touches in there like focus and select all and your accept and cancel button, because these are the things that the user sort of expects even though they don't really know that that's what they expected. And when the application becomes easy to use and they don't have to think about it, they're going to be much happier with it and less likely to look for complaints. So I can see on here, I think the only thing that we have left to do is to change this form 1 over to something that makes a little more sense. So clicking on our form, going into text, let's say salary calculator. And that makes it look a little nicer. And we could probably change the background, make it a little more pleasing to the eye. So we look for the back color, and maybe we can do a nice blue. There we go. I don't know how easy that is in the eye, but it's better than it was before, definitely. Going through the code, let's take another look, make sure we have our proper comments. Okay. This one needs a closes the application. Button submits, looking great. Those are some great comments. And it really pays to do the pseudocode right in the beginning, because then you don't have to go back and redo the comments. Clear out the placeholder text. And then lastly, we can get away with this, say clear out all input and output. Return focus to the top text box. So that's a pretty nice looking application, and it's actually useful. And I think we're to the point that if you wanted to, and there was some math problems that you'd be nice that if you could do it over and over again and not have to punch the numbers into calculator, it's really a great use for Visual Studio, and it would be good practice too. Because then you just punch the numbers in. Maybe we want to do 50 hours, hit enter, and that's that. And this might be something that you do a lot. Especially if you're looking for a job and you want to figure out, well, how does this compare to what I do now? How many hours is this? going from an hourly wage over to a salary, you could also do the opposite and say, well, I'm getting offered this much money for a salary. How does that translate into hours per week? So that's good too, and it can definitely put a different perspective on things. So if you think of things in your life that you always do repetitiously like this, those are great examples to teach yourself programming. It's great to follow along with my examples, and certainly the assignments help, but if you can think of things that might help you, it's great to have some motivation behind you when you're trying to learn something. So try and look for those kind of things in your daily life, and if you think of things, write a program for it. It's definitely a great way to learn.